Tyrell, I think she wanted you to go with her. You know what? That's a blessing, folks. It's a blessing to have so many of our children coming in here to learn in today's society. The past couple of weeks, I don't remember, what have I been preaching on? Something. Spirits, different spirits that Satan uses to disturb the world. Yeah, I'm going to have to, I guess, because I can't get to the right verse. The first one was the spirit of delusion. We talked about the Pharisees and the Sadducees were under the spirit of delusion, thinking that they were God's representatives, and they tended to reject what God was doing and were actually in conflict with God instead of being with Him, because they weren't open to see and know what the Spirit was doing. That's why they rejected Jesus so long, and always at odds with Him, compared Him to times of being casting out demons in the name of Beelzebub, who's another name for Satan. They were always trying to trick Him in various things, but they became aggressive towards that because it's under that spirit of delusion that Satan works, and he still works today doing that with people, and he tends to work in religion, that he makes you very religious, but you're not always godly. Because being religious means you can go your own way with your own ideas and call it godly, but it doesn't mean it is godly. And so that spirit's still active today. Last week I talked about the spirit of fear, and that tends to come on to people who either have no faith at all or have very little faith, and they tend to be those that don't trust God, and Satan's able to put in a spirit of doubt into them. He did that with Eve in the Garden of Eden by telling her, "Oh, you won't die. God says you not to eat of this fruit that you'll die." He said, "You won't. You'll become like God." So he did that doubt in her, and that spirit of fear that what if God was wrong in what He said. And so people live their life that way, and they never experience the victory that's truly theirs, and they are empty and they're afraid instead of walking boldly with God and being strong with Him. Well, today we're going to talk about one. This was a tough one for me to identify with one word. I don't know why God gave me the word. I kept coming up with different things. It's the spirit of confusion. And within that, because I kept looking at the confusion in the world today and in the lack of understanding who people are, and I kept going to whether the spirit of low self-esteem or the spirit of low value. But in the world today, it just, I think, summarizes it up the most is the spirit of confusion, because people are confused about who they are and who other people are. Would you agree with that? Everything's kind of upside down. We look, and every day the criminals have become the victims. The cops are the bad guys. The laws are all wrong, and so we don't enforce the law. We let criminals run. And even this week, on one of the newscasts, they were talking about New York City was going to crack down on shoplifting. I thought, boy, this ought to be interesting. We're going to crack down on it, really make it tough on these shoplifters from going in there. And they've come up with this brilliant idea. Now, if you go in and you shoplift, you can be banned from ever going into that store again. Wow, man, that's going to really affect them. They're not going to be able to go in there and buy anything in the store they just shoplift from. So it's really just get tough on these people, And it's like, really? I mean, you call that cracking down? And then they said in New York City, only 365 people commit over 6,000 crimes, and we don't know what to do with them. Well, you take about 100 rooms, put 3.6 of them in every room, keep them there, and you've eliminated 6,000 crimes if that's the thing. Or put them on a work farm or do something with them. But we're confused about that. But what troubles me most is schools are now telling you parents, you don't know how to raise your children. And therefore, we know more, and we're going to teach your children what we think they should know, and we're going to let them hide that from you because you don't have a right to know where they're going. Now, the best I remember, we don't think a child is old enough to vote till he's at least 18. A child is not capable of buying alcohol till he's 21. They want to ban a child from buying a gun till he's 20. Well, what makes us think a child in the 5th grade would know what kind of sexual orientation he ought to be and what kind of things he needs to be able to do and make medical decisions? Because first of all, if he falls on the playground in the 5th grade and breaks an arm, they will not touch him till a guardian signs off on it. But now, if he wants to take all these hormone deals or whatever they do, or have some surgery, well, we're going to be all right with that because mom and dad don't need to know about this. Now, folks, we are kind of confused. But the problem is what's going on in the world today. The reason they want this mess taught to kindergarten kids is because they want to confuse them even more in who they are. And I was thinking about all kinds of examples and stuff of where we are as a society, and this is what I came up to for a bunch of rednecks in East Texas. You can look out there and see those Holstein calves out there. They think they have went to heaven. Because every day I go over and feed them a whole mess of corn and some other stuff mixed in there with it, and all they got to do is come in there and eat. They got it made. They lay around in the shade all day and they come eat. What they don't know, on October 5th, all that comes to an end. But see, I have convinced them to come into that pen every day and come in there and eat, and it's all well and good. But on October 5th, about 8 o'clock that morning, probably about 7 o'clock, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to put that bucket in that feed trough, and then I'm going to ease around there and I'm going to shut that gate. And there's going to be a trailer backed up there, and they're going to run around there, and they're going to go up in that trailer, and we're going to take a little trip to Mount Pleasant. And when they come back, they will be in 5-pound packages called hamburger. You say, well, what does that have to do with confusion? Folks, that's exactly what Satan does. He feeds you a bunch of little old stuff, and before you know it, you're trapped. And he's got you. The government has been feeding us this trash for 50 years that we are taking care of you. The government knows more than you do. It began in my lifetime back when we began to tear apart the family and we began to raise children in single family homes. Is that possible? It can work. But it also eliminates half the formula that God has, the man and the woman raising children. And therefore we begin to see the breakdown in society, and that's when we begin to see the rise in things where homosexual behavior began to come up because they were missing 50%. Young boys didn't have a man in their life because mom's having to raise them because the men have bailed out on their responsibility. So guys, I'm going to talk to you about that. You have a responsibility to raise up your sons to be sons. Ladies, you have a responsibility to raise your daughters up to be daughters. But not only did we do that in the family, but then we began to get into organizations such as the Boy Scouts. Now, I'm giving you my pet peeves. I was a Boy Scout. I have been a scout leader in Boy Scouts, and I have loved to watch boys be boys. And the last thing I wanted there was some 11, 12, 13-year-old girls to mess them up. Because a boy needs to learn how to be a boy. And he needs to be able to go do that. In the same way with girls, I don't want my girls growing up to be boys. I wanted my girls to grow up to be good little girls and do stuff. And they both turned out pretty good. They got good kids and they're raising their kids up. Wanted my boy to grow up, be a boy. Now he's raising some boys. But we began to tear down that. Well, then we thought on equal rights, let's just let them play football with each other. So instead of having women's sports, we said we want to not discriminate. See, we always put it on this word discriminate and all this stuff. We want them to play together. Huh? Yeah. But the whole deal was girls needed the same right, but they still needed to be in their sports and competing. See, we didn't get to this transgender mess overnight. We took a few decades to get there. But it began by tearing down what's natural. Because God has a natural organization for everything, and that's what I want us to talk about today. And I want your children to be, and your young people especially, to get hold of this, because this is there. In Jeremiah 1, verse 5, this is what he told Jeremiah. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you, and I have appointed you a prophet to the nations. Folks, I want you to know, before you were ever conceived, God knew exactly what He intended for you to be. He knew what you would be and where He wanted you to be and what to do. And He had a plan for you in His organization. So He knew how to make boys and knew how to make girls. So when He made you the one you needed to be. Now that's simple in my mind. But in the confusion that Satan has thrown out there, now with all this messed up world and families and all that we've got, we're teaching boys that you ought not really be a boy. You ought not be strong and masculine and all that. You ought to be feminine. Well, the thing is, God didn't instill in boys feminine characteristics. He gave them manly characteristics. That's why they act the way they do. I got 2 grandsons. They love each other and they'll help each other right up to the time they're fighting with one another. They love to fight and wrestle and do those things. I had 2 girls I raised, and they love to fight too. But they fought a little different than boys. But with girls, He puts in those feminine characteristics that He wanted them to have, and that's why they tend to nurture. Did you notice a while ago the girls were up there, and even if they didn't know the song, they were trying. Did you notice the boys standing over there? They're not into all that. They're there because Mama told them to be. Where their mind was is out there running and playing and kicking and doing stuff. That's what it's all to be. But you see, we've got so confused with what's natural, we don't understand. And it's pretty plain in the Bible that God knew who we should be. So maybe our parents need to get back into some scripture and understand when He gave me a son, He meant for him to be a boy. We need to quit encouraging him and say, well, God made you and He's going to let you make your decision. He will let you make your decision, but it doesn't mean it's going to be what He wanted. That's called the nature, the freedom that God gives us is that people can make their own decisions, but it's not always a godly decision. And it's not always good for you. And that's why we're arguing over some of the stuff that we should argue over with today, and it becomes big debates. It's senseless. Why would we argue over abortion? Does God, well, we didn't plan this baby. Might be the greatest blessing you ever had. My biggest blessing was from a woman who didn't plan to have a child at 42 years old, but she had a daughter that became my wife and became a big blessing to her. And I'm glad. I'm sure after having 8 already, she had just soon not had number 9 and number 10. But she did. And she raised them up. And I was blessed because of it. So I'm glad. Because God had a purpose and stuff. So God knows who we are. You say, well, that was Jeremiah. God didn't know about me. Well, he knew about King David also over in Psalm 139. I love to use this at funerals and various things because David talks about that. In verse 1, he says, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me." Now think about that. God has looked into David's heart, searched him, and he knows everything about you. And in spite of that, he still chose to use him. You know what? God knew me before I was born. He knew me when I was growing up. He knew my rebellion. He knew all those things about me that I would do. And in September 1982, he still chose to save me in spite of who I was. Because he was able to look into my future and see something that I couldn't see. He said, if, Dwayne, I save you today and you follow me, I've got a purpose in your life. He gave Randall the understanding that on that day in September 1982, he brought us together so that Randall could witness to me. I had been around Randall my whole life. I knew who he stood for. I knew the God he believed in, but I didn't know him. I mean, Randall, to my knowledge, all he'd ever done was plant a few seeds in there. I knew where he stood. But he had never shared the gospel with me till that day because I believe that day was ordained because I was ready to have a seed planted and come forth. You can throw seed out on this concrete every day. And if it rains enough, it will sprout, but it will not survive. So what God was doing was waiting on me to get right for that seed to be planted so it could spring forth and produce fruit. And God did that in my life. But He worked in my life prior to that because there's no doubt in my mind He brought me and Barbara together because to be married to a preacher is not an easy task. He only works 2 hours a week and everything's hunky-dory, no problems, nothing going on. People never call late at night and tell them about all their troubles going on. He never gets called in the middle of the night and have to go to hospitals or anything like that. Just never happens. Never have a vacation canceled because something happens. So it takes a special woman to be married to a preacher. Verse 2, you know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thought from afar. You scrutinize my path and my lying down and are intimately acquainted with all my ways. Even before there was a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you knew it all, and you have enclosed me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? Folks, that's the God that you serve. That's the God that has a plan for your life. And confusion is not in that plan. The confusion comes from not knowing this God, not following this God, and not living for this God. It comes straight from the pits of hell to try to delude people. And so when we see this, we ought not be amazed because our churches have become so anemic in preaching and proclaiming the gospel. We've become a place of just accepting to all. When people do not know the truth, they will live a lie. You can make a wonderful place, and there's churches all around, fantastic music, fantastic buildings, fantastic messages about how God's going to prosper them and give them all these good things. How God's going to reward them. If you'll plant this seed of money right here, He's going to multiply it 100-fold. You give me $1,000 and He'll give you 100,000. People doing that every week. Praying. When it didn't happen, He said, well, you didn't have enough faith. It's your fault. You need to have more faith. You need to give more. You got to have all these wonderful things. But so many times preachers are scared to preach the truth. The truth is God will bless you if you are obedient to Him. He can give you 100-fold, but He's not obligated to. Okay? Your blessing may come in that God holds back that 100-fold. Because, folks, most people, when they get a wad of money, are broke in 2 years. You don't believe me? Check out the statistics on lottery winners. Well over 8 out of 10 of them receive a large amount of money and are dead broke and filing bankruptcy within 2 years. Why? Huh? Athletes and everything. Anybody that receives a lot of money right off the bat, because see, if you can't manage $100, you'll never manage $100 million. And sometimes God's holding back those blessings because you need to progress into that. But this is what I will tell you. You be obedient to Him, He will take care of you. And He will provide, and He'll bless you, and He'll do what you need to. And when He's not doing the things that you want Him to, well, He's got a lesson He's going to teach you. Because He has a purpose. I've been blessed to walk with Him now for be 41 years in a couple of weeks. And I've got story after story of answered prayers that God did for me. And I'm glad it turned out the way it did. I didn't always understand it. I didn't always know what He was doing. Sometimes I was in God's permissive will and not in His divine will. Because sometimes He said, all right, hardhead, you want to go over here and do this. It's what you think. Go ahead. And when you come to your senses, I'll bring you back and we'll start all over and we'll go on my journey. Because, see, there are two wills of God. There is that permissive will when He says, okay, the prodigal son, good example when Jesus said, the father knew what was going to happen. He gives him the money. He goes off. He comes back. But the God's divine will is when you walk with Him every day. And sometimes we have to do these little offshoots to come back. But when you do, you'll find out God's always there. Mark, in a prayer we had this morning out there in the elders meeting, he made a statement that's so true. When we walk off like that, you know how far away God is? One step. And it's so true. He's right there within one step. You make a step towards Him, and He'll be there to get you. But He's waiting on you to come back to Him. But the spirit of confusion that Satan puts out causes us to wander away. And next thing we know, we're trapped, just like those two Holstein calves. Everything looks good. That truck drives up every morning, and I get a big dose of corn. Man, I am doing good. Don't have to eat that old grass. Just eat what I want. Plenty of water here. Now, all I got to do is come through that little old gate and in here, and it's there waiting on me. But one day the gate will be shut. And they're going to think, this is not normal. It's what's happening in the world today. Satan has drugged people into this stuff, and he's shutting the gate, and now they can't get away. And they're forced to go and do what he's confused them into, and that's why we're where we are. You see, we didn't come up with politicians with these ideas. We voted them in. People voted for these people. I've had people tell me, well, I don't believe in abortion. Well, if you voted for a guy that did, you just told the whole world you're for abortion. You don't believe in gay marriage? Well, when you vote for a guy that's for it, you just said, I'm for it. Oh, no, I don't. Yeah. We put the people up there that's making the decisions. So whose fault is it that we're in the shape we're in? I am. Or the worst off is ones that didn't vote at all. I don't care. Well, then get what you're going to get. Omaha held an election, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. Omaha is a town of 1,000, a little over 1,000 people. We were going to vote whether to allow alcohols to be sold in city limits of Omaha. How many people you think voted that day? How many of you think between 100 and 200? How many of you think 2 to 400? How many of you believe it's less than 100? You're right. 88 people in a town of 1,000 voted. 40 or somewhere around 40 voted against it, and 48 voted for it. How many think there's more than 40 Christians in the city of Omaha? I do. City limit. Where were they at on voting day? They didn't care. Some of them may have been in the 48 that voted for it. Don't have to drive as far. I'm saving money. I'm being a good steward of what God gave me. Well, what's wrong with selling it there? Tax money. Folks, you're talking to a guy that was the mayor of Omaha for nearly 4 years. Out of that 8.25% tax that you get, the city of Omaha will get just right at 1%. We get the 25.25, but it's itemized to go a certain place, and then the rest of it's about 1% comes in there. So for every $100 that's spent, the city of Omaha gets $1.25 of it. This is another thing people don't understand. In every town that's voted for it, the crime rate triples. It takes 3 times as many law enforcement people to keep crime to the same level that it was before you legalize it. So expenses go up. So you're not making any money. So there it is. But see, we let this confusion go, and we said we don't care, we don't worry about it. It's a spirit that is ruining our churches, and it's ruining our country, and it's ruining our schools, and it's ruining our families, because it just continues to grow more and more. And then some redneck preacher that doesn't know any better than to tell you the truth gets up there, and so people just attack him and say, well, he's crazy. I don't like what he says. He's mean. Well, I may be, and at times I can be, but I'm mean enough to want you to know the truth. And I've tried to preach the truth so that you will stand before God one day and will be able to give an account, because you won't be able to say, well, I listened to Brother Dwayne and he lied to me. No, I'm going to tell you what the Word says. And I'm going to tell you about these spirits that's out there trying to deceive you. Don't be mad at the people. They're just being brought in by the same spirit that Satan's always used over and over again. He doesn't mind you being religious. He'll give you that spirit of delusion. He'll get you confused. He don't mind you even if he loses souls to a few of them to salvation. He'd rather you not. So what he does is try to hinder you by causing doubt. So he just tries to hold you back anyway, so you don't infect anybody else with that religious stuff, that godly stuff. We don't want you to be infected. So I'm just going to let you kind of walk along here, and just as long as you're not bother anybody else, then that's all right. And then for the rest of them, he just tries to put a spirit of confusion out there so nobody knows what's natural. Folks, God created me a man, and a man that has a right to do things and to serve him. He created my wife to be a woman because she was raised that way, and you can call it old-fashioned or whatever, but it's godly. And these girls and these boys need to know God has a plan for you. He has something for you to do, and it's not on the phone, Gabby. Oh, she's taking note, huh? All right. And I'm going to tell you, Gabby, when a boy takes you out, you're not an object. You're an individual. And if he treats you as anything else, you tell him, you put your forefinger right there in that nose, and you tell him, you take me home. Right now. The other thing is, if he will not come to the door and get you, you just wave at him and say, you might as well leave. Because if he can't come in there and talk to mom and dad, he doesn't need to take you out. And guys, if you ever pull up there and you toot your horn and they come running, I'm going to be tooting your horn one day because I'm going to. I still open the door for my wife on multiple occasions to let her in the door. I still walk with her hand in hand when we go out to eat. 46 years later, she's the only one that holds my hand. Because I still take her out on dates because she is my wife. And I still respect her for who she is. She raised my children. She's raising my grandchildren and teaching them some things. Some of them not always good. She gives them money when I'm trying to make them earn money, but that's the grandma in her. She can't help herself. You know what a grandmama does to earn, for you to earn money? Just smile. You just smile and grandmama pay you. She'll get over it. But God's got it so simple. He says, here it is. You don't have to be confused. We don't have to live in this situation. But we choose to because we have allowed this spirit of confusion to rule over truth. And that's why nobody knows what's true. And the world's okay with it. Our government is okay with it. Parents, you have no right. Now, really? That's kind of a few times I wish my dad didn't have any rights. I wish some of them had interfered in there. Woo, he could tear up that spot on the backside of me that was built for that and stuff, and just let me know how disappointed he was. But you know what? As I got older, I learned to realize I'm glad he did. He kept me out of a lot of trouble. But who would have ever thought our government would give more rights to a child to make decisions that are lifelong decisions when they're in kindergarten? See, they know a kindergarten not going to make a decision. What are they doing? They're brainwashing that child. Joshua turns 5 years old. He doesn't even know the difference between girls and boys right now. He doesn't want to know. He just wants to be a boy. He wants to play. He don't mind playing with Quinn or any others. It just doesn't matter. You could dress him up like a doll today. He doesn't care as long as he's having fun. But there's a time when you need to teach him the difference and let him do it. But because he dresses up like a girl doesn't mean he wants to be one. He's just a little old kid that doesn't know any better. Yeah, we can go all over this place. But it's confusion. And we as a society have let it happen because nobody wants to preach against it. Nobody wants to stand up. Well, God made them that way. No, He didn't. God made you a man and a woman, and He had intentions for you to be married to each other and to raise the children in a home with a man and a woman there. People say, well, you're down on single parent. I sure am, because a woman, you ought not ever be hooked with a man that won't help raise your kids and help provide for that. We've already been having some discussions about that. Girls, if you're going with a guy and he won't pay for your meal, dump him. We're going to preach on that next week. By the sweat of your brow. And Melinda, Don't mean you can take advantage of Casey. We'll be preaching on that in the future too. Just because he was sweating, doing all sweating, don't mean you get to do all the spending. We're going to educate him. But there's part of that spirit of confusion. Guys want to lay around and tell the woman to go to work and do all this and play. They won't play video games. Who's supposed to be the head of the house? The man. Is that chauvinistic? That's godly. He's supposed to be the head. But he's also supposed to love his wife as he loves himself. Supposed to take care of her and give her. Supposed to provide leadership for the children and be involved in that. Get the boys involved in stuff. And folks, I'm harping on this. Don't try to make girls be in everything the boys are. I just think it's ludicrous to take boys on a camp out. Well, you just don't know what a bunch of 13-year-old boys can do on a camp out. Inhibition goes out. I had a mama that one time was so worried about her little boy being so inhibited and stuff, and when he go on camp, he won't even take a shower in front of people. I look up there on the hill, he's stark naked, standing on his cot, dancing around like this. I said, yeah, he's inhibited, all right. When he gets away from mama, this kid's 12, 13 years old, first time ever been to camp. Boy, he was loving the freedom. Girls just didn't need to be there. They just do things. And it's better for them to go do it with themselves so the girls are not exposed to that. But girls do it too. And I want them to be girls. Be proud of it. And live a life that's pleasing to God. And by all means, just don't let somebody confuse you with lies. Let me just give you this. I'm going to jump on down. All right, let me see. I got all these marked. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. David knew God made him, and he was very well. Did David ever mess up? What was the statement that God made about King David? He was a man after my own heart. He made mistakes. Some of them were bad mistakes. But in David's heart, he sought to do nothing but glorify God, honor God, and even in his mistakes, he would repent and come back to God. He never walked away. He never really rebelled against God. And even in his mistakes, he always repented and came back to God. But because his heart was to be all that God wanted. And so many of our Psalms were written straight from the heart of King David in the life that was going on, from people trying to kill him, to him fleeing, to the rejoicing, to the sadness when his son born with Bathsheba, the first one, passed away. He mourned and grieved and rejoiced in that psalm. But he turned around and raised up a son named Solomon, who was the wisest of all kings. And God used him. But the spirit of confusion is out there. And it's what you're hearing about every day. And it's going to grow worse until truth overrides it. The only people who's got the truth are you and I. And it's right here in this book. That's why you've got to proclaim it. When people tell you and try to explain to you why these people are doing what they're doing, say, God didn't make them that way. Their environment and people in their environment made them that way because they let them become confused instead of setting them straight and telling them the truth. Y'all working at school. Several of y'all work at school. And y'all dealing with that issue. You see it in the parents that bring these kids up there and then tell you to fix them. And what does the law do? Don't fix it with truth. You've got to psychoanalyze them. Try to figure out how to make them feel apart. Man, I'm telling you, you can't work with your hands behind your back. The schools need prayer. It needs the truth being preached up there. I'm thankful our schools around this area allow more to be done, way more than what's legal. Because we have some godly administrators, we've got godly teachers, and we've got people intervening in up there to help them. We've got some godly students that are standing up, and I'm proud of that. Because that's what's keeping Pewitt, Hugh Springs, and Dangerfield from becoming a school like in L.A. We got some godly people that are literally breaking a few rules and regulations because they want truth there. We need to support them in that, stand for that. Okay? Spirit of confusion, it's out there. And it's what's dealing us the hand we're dealt right now. All right, next week we're going to talk about Labor Day weekend. I think that's where I'm planning on going. All right, y'all got anything? Are you going to have a good week? You got somebody you're praying for? No, I'm not praying for just their health. I'm talking about praying for them. That may be under the spirit of delusion, the spirit of fear, or the spirit of confusion. Pray that their eyes will be open and their heart will be softened, that they can come to know the God of the Bible and be willing to come sit under some truth and hear what the Word says and then respond to it. We win this battle one victory at a time, one person at a time. But we've got to make a difference. And God's got people all around you that need to know some truth. Father, we're waiting on your rain. We're waiting on your cool weather. We're waiting on you, Father, to give us an opportunity to serve you. And I know you do it every day. But open our eyes and ears so that we can find places. Arm us with truth so that we can confront the spirit of confusion, the spirit of fear, the spirit of delusion that's being used to deceive millions of people. But Father, help us have an understanding of what your word says and what you desire of us so that we can touch and impact our friends, our relatives, and our neighbors by helping provide some stability in their lives. I pray for our students as they go. I love them, and I know they're learning, they're doing a lot, and they're standing up, but they're also being torn and pulled away because there's so much to get after them. So be with them and give them strong hearts. I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank y'all for being here, guys and girls.